Welcome, welcome, welcome to another live reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. We are on the chapter entitled The Machine. I had to stop mid, like right at the beginning of the chapter because we couldn't keep going through. This is a pretty long chapter. So I am going to get started. Again, we are on page 363, and we are at just pretty much at the beginning of the chapter entitled The Machine. All right. Now, they do this with the help of funding received from the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which approve and bankroll this global arrangement. It is an arrangement by which both the world's female population and the world's labor population are legally laid out for sexual economic use via the political and religious laws and customs of their home countries. Actual sexual coercion happens frequently in the free trade zones, as it has always happened to women on the job, with male bosses trading continued employment for sexual favors on the work tables. But the major sexual control and exploitation is and will be a total control of female reproduction by way of the workplace, i.e., via the economic, political needs and manipulations of the multinational corporations. Indigenous male governments worldwide, to maintain themselves in funds and power, seem generally willing to loan out the bodies and lives of their female populations in this prostitutional way. And what about the male populations of these countries? Unfortunately, many of them can find employment only in the National Guards and police forces. And in these occupations, they are frequently sent to work against the women workers, to break up labor sit-downs and organizational meetings, to destroy and punish any attempt on the part of the female employees to form active unions or engage in political protest. It is the classic imperialist maneuver to dominate a people by turning a sufficient number of indigenous males into armed guards, policing and terrorizing their own people, in particular the indigenous women, thus diverting sexual energy from revolution into repression. In Guatemala, in the Dominican Republic, in Taiwan, in the Philippines, in South Korea, in Malaysia, National Guards and police forces have been sent in by their governments to break up demonstrations, strikes, or simply meetings of female workers. In the Dominican Republic, the dominant multinational corporation, Gulf and Western, sponsors its own goon squad, an indigenous male motorcycle gang which specializes in terrorizing suspected union sympathizers. In Incheon, South Korea, women at the Dong-Tu Textile Company, a producer of fabrics and yarn for export to the U.S., had succeeded in gaining leadership in their union local in 1972. In 1978, the government-controlled male-dominant Federation of Korean Trade Unions sent special action squads to destroy the women's union. Armed with steel bars and buckets of human excrement, the goons broke into the union office, smashed the office equipment, and smeared excrement over the women's bodies and in their ears, eyes, and mouths. Classic labor organization strategy, long dominated by males, has been reluctant to consider the political importance of working women's issues and has been contemptuous of the theory put forth by some socialist and Marxist women that female productive and reproductive labor is the primary producer of wealth and must be so structured into any effective labor theory and practice. Classic revolutionary strategy, long dominated by males, has been equally reluctant to consider the political primacy of female issues and equally contemptuous of the idea that a revolution should be mounted on the issue of women's oppression and liberation. With the spread of the global factory and the consequent merger of women's reproductive issues with female workers' issues among a planetary, multinationally controlled workforce of primarily exploited women, these classic labor, left, and revolutionary political male attitudes and positions have got to change. In the present situation, if males do not join with women workers to fight for female reproductive autonomy along with workers' rights, then males have no other place to go except to join the National Guards, the SWAT teams, the goon squads gearing up everywhere to help colonize and exploit their own countrywomen as slave workers and breeding machines. These are the only two options left for political men, or in a totally politicized world, for all men. So long as governments can control female reproduction in any way, the workforce can be equally controlled. Vice versa, it will be possible for governments and global corporations to totally control populations of workers so long as they are able to control populations of females as breeding machines or non-breeding machines. No one can be free unless females are free to control our own sex and our own reproduction. If we don't control our bodies, they are controlled by the boss, and that keeps the boss in power forever. Some slaves can dominate and exploit the slavery of others, the classic imperialist situation, but no one will have a chance to be ontologically free. This is no longer the logic of feminism alone. It has expanded to become the inner logic of the multinational corporate marketplace and consequently of global factory structure and operations in relation to the international workforce. I just had to say, why are women's bodies regulated in any way by government? Is men's bodies regulated? Like, what? How you gonna tell me if I can have a baby? Is that crazy? Second, how does fundamentalist religion fit into all of this? Clearly, it was patriarchal pastoralist religion that originally sanctified and enforced the Bronze Age designation of women as breeding machines, as cattle, yes, but cattle for the greater glory of God. It was the male priesthoods of Father Guy religions who first wrote and enforced the new laws and new customs that stripped Neolithic women of all their ancient sexual autonomy and made their sexual and reproductive functions the property of a dominating male elite for God and profit. It was the Bronze Age priesthoods of Yahweh in particular who first wrote down and applied moral sanctions and religious justifications for the treatment of women as ontologically inferior beings, sacred only to the extent that we have or should have divine male sperm growing inside us. In the face of post-World War II feminism and a general desire on the part of many in the Western world to liberalize their religious ideas, and in particular to undemonize sexuality for both sexes, the modern fundamentalist priesthood has rebutted strongly, raising the banner of their Bronze Age counterparts of 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. The basic tenets of the Bronze Age priesthood being that human sex is sacred only for reproductive purposes, and two, women have nothing to say about it except, yes, master. Women essentially evil is sacralized only by lifelong sacrificial submission to the male sex and to reproduction. Thus speaketh the Bronze Age holy men of the 1980s. When Curtis Anton Becerra was arrested for firebombing a feminist health center and abortion clinic in Everett, Washington in 1984, he confessed to police, "I did it for the glory of God." In 1984, 24 abortion clinics or counseling offices in 7 states were destroyed or heavily damaged by bombs or arson, and there were 150 reported cases of vandalism and harassment. Don Benny Anderson, who is now serving 42 years in a Wisconsin prison for a clinic bombing in suburban Washington, D.C., 2 bombings in Florida, and the kidnapping of an Illinois doctor who performed abortions, is also the man who coined the term Army of God to describe the fundamentalists with a mission to stop abortion in America. Referring to the bombing so far, he said, "These are just warning blasts. We are in the embryonic stages of civil war, holy war." The holy bombers of abortion clinics are utterly sincere in their beliefs. Furthermore, they are right. Their God does call for total control by men over the sexual and reproductive functions of women, extending far beyond the forbidding of abortion. Contraception of any kind is forbidden, or any method that might allow women to engage in non reproductive sex for pleasure. Their God is the Bronze Age father god of cattle breeders, the biblical Yahweh, from whom Hebrew women of those days were to be made as pregnant as possible to multiply his congregation. This did not spare pregnant women of other neighboring faiths, however, from having their bellies ripped up by holy heroes like King Menahem before he was established on the throne of Israel by the same God. That's 2 Kings 15:16. The Old Testament Yahweh was concerned with the fertility of the Hebrew tribes, while simultaneously he did not hesitate to command and sanctify the slaughter of other people's tribes, including other people's children, suckling infants, and fetuses, i.e., pregnancy and population control, even in the Bible, were highly political. Be that as it may, the fundamentalist Protestant and Catholic anti-abortionists, so let me say that again. Be that as it may, the fundamentalist Protestant and Catholic anti-abortionists, hey Alicia, are following the ways and dictates of their God. The rudimentary question remains, is their God the God? The feminist joke is, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. The corollary to this is, if God is seen as female, the problem does not exist. That is, the entire question of sex, pregnancy, birth control, even abortion undergoes an ontological somersault, a revolution of basic terms. Just what God, whose God, what life, whose fertility, and who and what is defining God or life? Evolutionary biology shows that the human female alone evolutionary biology shows that the human female alone among all Earth's creatures is designed for non-reproductive orgasmic pleasure. In her development of the menstrual cycle and her breakaway from the estrus or heat cycle of the mammalian world, the human female led the way for all the other advances of our species. Only human beings copulate for purposes other than species reproduction, for emotional bonding and expression, for personal pleasure, for personal confusion, personal power and glory, personal revelation, while it is precisely the poor beasts who copulate only to reproduce. The fact that the human female can and does engage in non-reproductive copulation is exactly the fact that defines her and her partner as human. How could the fundamentalist fatherhood get it so wrong? When they tell us from the Bible's pages or the church pulpits that human sex is sacred only if it tries to make babies and that otherwise the act reduces us to a level of the beast, how could they have got it all so mixed up, so backwards? When the preachers of all time denounce Eve and through her all women for our innately lascivious and devilish sexuality, how is it that they make the horrible mistake of confusing what demonizes us with what humanizes us? The answer is, number one, because the Bronze Age priesthoods were members of pastoralist tribes and their new patriarchal ideas of God and of human intercourse derived from cattle breeding. And number two, because female sexual autonomy represented the ancient Neolithic goddess religion, which these priesthoods had set out to demonize and destroy. The biblical God was indeed a jealous God, and it was precisely the goddess, her women, and human pleasure that he was jealous of. And it was precisely because he and his priesthoods set themselves against sexual pleasure that his own people kept backsliding. Wait a minute. And it was precisely because he and his priesthoods set themselves against sexual pleasure that his own people kept backsliding. The father gods and son gods who emerged triumphant through force of arms and fanaticisms from the Bronze Age were concerned not with human pleasure, nor with human evolution, nor human transcendence. They and their ruling priesthoods were concerned with power and with control. And the way to control human beings, the way to gain power over human biological energy and the energies of the human psyche is to dominate and control the sexual and reproductive functions of women. This is done by number one, trying to restrict sex only to reproduction or reproductive attempts. And number two, taking the control over that reproduction away from women and handing it over to men, who then piously, mechanistically enact sex via the female body as a service to God. The Christian religion historically and biblical fundamentalists today must refute the evidence of evolution because they must refute the ontological primacy or rightness of the human female as she is a sexual being. Fundamentalists must deny evolution, insisting instead that human beings came fully formed from the hands of Yahweh, because they must deny the correctness of human sexuality the way it is. Instead, they must insist it results from the fall through the sin of Eve, and this explains why human beings are so sexual, i.e. corrupt. Through this anti-evolutionary device, the Bronze Age priesthoods thus set up their pure God, an asexual, anti-sexual, non-biological God, against the sexual goddess who represents the ontological emergence of human beings from and through billions of years of evolution into a conscious and spiritual sexual mode unique to us and thoroughly proper for us. Thus, the terrible irony that for centuries of human existence, in the name of distinguishing the human spirit from that of the lowly beasts, the fundamentalist priesthood has stupidly and brutally tried to restrict human sexual activity precisely to that of the beast. Is it ironic, or has it been intentional? Sexual restriction and control, the promulgation and enforcement of moral codes based on sexual paranoia, has been the machinery by which the priesthoods have kept themselves in power, have maintained their control over human beings. Patriarchal religious power over the human mind and the human spirit has been achieved via the genitals. This is how the machinery of control and power works. The ontological coupling of female and male was broken apart, and the organic sexual energy thus released was turned into the mechanistic energy of sexual hostility. This atom splitting was done by a male priesthood who defined woman and sex as evil and dangerous, and then gave moral control over this evil situation to man, who was thereby rendered ontologically alien to himself, to woman, and to the entire natural world, because from that moment on, he owed his life and his pleasure to something that he was supposed ever after to see as evil, corrupt, and hostile to his soul. Something like an animal or a plot of land he was supposed to both use and restrict as a God-appointed exploiter and policeman. It was the classic imperialist device activated in the Bronze Age by the power-seeking male priesthood. Divide and conquer. Divide the spiritual man from the ontological woman, and then enroll him as her policeman, her exploiter, her colonizer in the army of God and for the profit of God and man. The totally colonized man, colonized by priestly ideology, is thus appeased by giving him the female to colonize. And his potentially revolutionary energy is thus turned into repressive hostility against woman, against his other half, his mate, his mother, his holistic self. And this is how the divine homosexual family of the patriarchal priesthood maintains its power, an enormous and seemingly endless power. The wreckage it has produced is all around us today. The results of generations of male hostility to the female, still manipulated and orchestrated by the holy men of all patriarchal systems. Reproduction-oriented sex prohibition of birth control, the demonization of female sexual pleasure and autonomy, the inculcation of lifelong guilt and perpetual fear surrounding the fact of sex itself. We know all this has done nothing to improve the relationship of woman and man, or of woman and woman, or man and man. On the contrary, it has, in Wilhelm Reich's accurate perception, created a bitterly deformed and deprived, repressed machinery which functions as the mechanical pathological energy source for all our larger human conflicts. They are larger only in the sense that they are the magnification of each man's sexual ontological pain and rage into global proportions. Perpetual seething rage and continuous violence, a world always and in all ways at war, is the inevitable result when men are told over and over from the beginning of their consciousness that the very source of their being is evil. This, well. This is certainly a source of so much male aggression, while women must be the evil, embody it within, and this is certainly a source of much female depression. For male and female life roles in patriarchal culture are structured on the belief in this ontological evil and its embodiment in our sexual selves. In the bedroom, in the home, in the neighborhood, in the city, in the nation, in the world, all human relationships have been in some way warped and devastated by the predictable mutual hostility, grinding antagonism, fear and guilt, vicious resentment and retribution between the sexes that must result when human beings are told that God wants them to behave in their beds like breeding cattle. The lingering, sour, and stiff lineaments of ungratified desire that must result when both sexes are yoked together in a grim beast of burden union called sanctified marriage, functioning as pious, non-ecstatic cattle to reproduce herd congregations for God and the Holy Church. Except the true beasts are innocent. They do not know what they do, nor what they are deprived of, nor what they suffer from the deprivation. Equally inevitable in such a world are periodic eruptions into what Pope John Paul II calls our present day hedonism, a sexual compulsiveness that occurs also automatically in reaction to the anti-sexual compulsiveness so characteristic of patriarchal culture. The Vatican sees the rise in abortion or in women's demands for abortion as a sign of Western hedonism and material self-indulgence, a wallowing in fleshly existence and a forgetting of the spirit. More abortions occur today, certainly, because abortions have been made legal, partially legal, or safer. This does not necessarily mean the demand or need for abortions have increased. They have just become visible. Some non-fundamentalist Christians are opposed to abortion primarily because they see that other preventive birth control measures are available and do not like to see surgical abortion used as a substitute for responsible birth control. No one does. But surely these thoughtful people must also understand that generation after generation of women raised in patriarchal cultures that have kept us systematically ignorant of our sexual and productive processes leaves its deep mark. Throughout Christendom, the ancient herbal contraceptives, the pagan body knowledge, the folklore and customs of non-reproductive sex once passed on from mother to daughter were destroyed with the holy fires or driven so far underground, few Western women ever again had access to them. With all our clinical technical knowledge of female sex and reproduction today, most teenage pregnancies occur among girls who never knew, were never taught how their bodies work or how to engage in sex without becoming pregnant. They do not know because their parents, their churches, their culture still assume that ignorance equals prevention and knowledge equals sin, and this despite all the overwhelming statistics to the contrary. But the Vatican's position and the fundamentalist patriarchal position generally is opposed to all birth control, to preventive mechanical and chemical contraception, as well as abortion. In this opposition, the Catholic Church and the fundamentalist sects reveals their desire to control human sexuality by dogmatically limiting its occurrence to potentially reproductive acts only. Anything else is sin, i.e., not dominated by fear, guilt, or the actual consequence of pregnancy. In his continued insistence that non reproductive sex is hedonistic and that legal abortion or contraception of any kind will only encourage and increase this hedonism, the Pope is repeating the celibate clergy's long indulged myopic illusion that only single women need abortion or birth control, i.e., that the demand for contraception and abortion is being made only by a lot of loose, lascivious single women seeking to enjoy sex outside of marriage. Is it myopic illusion or an intentional distortion? Surely the priesthood must know something of the 1,000-year history of married women within its own church. Surely the Vatican must know that throughout Christian, including Catholic history, women have always had abortions or have tried every bizarre means thinkable to prevent pregnancies or end them. But of course, they frequently risk death in doing so, or the contraception or abortion failed and they died in childbirth, or they survived childbirth and watched their children starve to death, or they saw their children grow to youth and then die as cannon fodder or rape victims or breeders for the ruling and collusive church-state wars, or they all died together of mass plagues exacerbated by the church's prohibitions on basic hygienic knowledge and witch medicine, or surely the church knows the common history of enormous numbers of women forced to live as breed cows under the pious folds of its male skirts, or how to avoid pregnancy at all costs they refused sex and were beaten into submission or death by their husbands with the church's blessing. We search the Vatican's long history and find nowhere any faint expression of shock or outrage over this 1,000-year-long saga of human wretchedness and abuse within the sacrament of Christian marriage. And we are forced to conclude, for one thing, that it is not contraception or abortion per se that the church opposes. What the Vatican and all fundamentalist priesthoods oppose is sex without punishment for women. Pregnancy is considered a divinely sufficient punishment for sex. Contraception and abortion are opposed because they allow a woman to escape punishment. To have sex and go scot-free? But in the old days, at least, the days of witch hunting and ignorance, contraception and especially abortion could be dangerous, life-threatening. If a woman sought abortion and died, well then, she was sufficiently punished too. Pregnancy or lethal abortion, it didn't matter, just so the woman was sufficiently punished for her sex. The problem today, and the reason the Pope is bemoaning mass hedonism, is that birth control, and in particular modern abortion, have been made relatively safe. It is possible for a woman to have sex and go free, relatively. It is possible for a woman to consider the possibility of enjoying sexual pleasure without facing punishment. And when this happens, women become women again. Men might even become men again. We might all become our whole selves. And lo, the patriarchal priesthood faces loss of employment, loss of control, for its hierarchic power over sexual humanity has always been in inverse proportion to the powerlessness of women and men over our own sexual lives. This is to say that there is no other choice. Either we live with sexual autonomy or we live under sexual fascism. Sexual fascism is a condition under which our sexual energy is sublimated for us by the automatic machinery of piety and drudgery. A machinery set in motion by the ruling elite to co-opt human biological energy, to use it to run its palaces, its mansions, its gorgeous religious mausoleums, to provide it with diversionary luxuries and wars, while a large revolutionary mass of exploited people is kept in a manipulatable condition of productive repression. The machinery of sexual fascism has been running the world for 3,000 or 4,000 years. And for just as long, the patriarchal priesthoods have been oiling and blessing its terrible gears. They turn at their most hideous under the love beds of every woman and man on earth until female sexual autonomy is achieved. They will continue to turn, even in the most liberated atmospheres, inside the hearts, the brains, the genitals of all of us. No one escapes unless everyone becomes free. That is how the machinery works. In today's world, thousands of children starve to death every day. Millions more suffer the kind of malnutrition that permanently damages the brain and the body. The priests of the world's major patriarchal religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, do not consider this situation particularly moral, but they do not consider it abnormal either. The poor are always with us. That was a quote. The poor are always with us. Another quote, life is hell, etc. The situation just seems to illustrate these priesthoods' biophobic case. In their ontological world hatred and doctrinal nihilism, the holy men try to persuade us, and no doubt themselves, that suffering is the eternal and definitive human condition, and the daily starvation of children is just one more sad but inescapable example of our mortal condition of fleshly sin and corruption, of samsara, which means the sorrow and impurity of the world, or of life on the wheel, which is the Buddhistic illusion. Male priesthoods of patriarchal religions, all of whom live in the maximum comfort and even luxury their cultures can afford, have been rationalizing the suffering of others for so long. Throughout 4,000 years of unctuous droning, no doubt they've come to believe their own words for want of hearing anything else. 1 million infants die each year of starvation and malnutrition in India. This is considered life by the Hindu holy men, who preach that all of life is just illusion anyway. But if this year 1 million holy men died of starvation in India, you may be sure we would hear something about it beyond the usual samsaric drone. 1 million starved babies a year does not make headlines. 1 million starved holy men probably would. But of course, eternal suffering is not the lot of the world's holy men, and never or rarely has been. Eternal suffering is rather their property, their thing, their device, as it were, which allows them to retain employment as representatives of an all-powerful male god who just doesn't somehow seem able to help solve any of these problems. The priests blame the problems on life, on humanity. They thus handedly explain all this injustice and imbalance while maintaining themselves in comfort as their beneficiaries. As holy men for whom life's eternal suffering is a profitable possession, they don't like blasphemous interference or challenge, especially from women. In the world of patriarchal piety, the only women who are rewarded, loved, or sainted are women like Mother Teresa, who succor the problem. Women who move to solve the problem are hated and cursed, or worse. For example, in 1984, Kuwaiti feminist Dr. Noura Al-Falah, a sociologist at Kuwait University, was fired from her job and imprisoned for the crime of lecturing on women under patriarchal religion. She analyzed and encouraged her students to analyze the positions of women in Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and Greek philosophy. For this, she was charged by her government with questioning the existence of God and anti-Islamic activity. This is one of those governments beloved by the fundamentalists in which God is at the center. Dr. Al-Falah is now awaiting execution for her crimes. Get the fuck out of here. The truth is, this much suffering, this much world suffering of starvation and degradation and brutality and poverty is neither normal. I'm sorry, I see. I don't know why. I'm sorry. So the truth is, this much suffering, this much world suffering of starvation and degradation and brutality and poverty is neither normal nor natural nor ontologically given. No normal living human female in a normal life situation. I'm gonna have to say this again. The truth is, this much suffering, this much world suffering of starvation and degradation and brutality and poverty is neither normal nor natural nor ontologically given. No normal living human female in a normal life situation keeps having children year after year just to watch half of them die before the age of 12. Women normally, and for most of human life on Earth, give birth to one child at a time. This is what distinguishes Homo sapiens from most mammals, except the higher primates and cetaceans. And with intense and exclusive maternal care, including nursing for 3 to 6 years, the mother concentrates on raising that one child to a healthy level of independent development before she has another baby. Among all primitive, primal people, this is the normal practice. Even primates nurse one baby for 3 to 6 years before becoming pregnant again. Even apes. No chimpanzee or gorilla mother is forced into bearing one baby a year, year after year. It just isn't done. Nor is it done anywhere where human females have healthy control of over their own reproduction. The problem of mass poverty, mass starvation, the mass deaths of children and infants every year from a simple lack of proper nourishment is not normal. It's not life, nor is it the fault of human sin or sex or of women. It is a condition traceable solely and specifically to patriarchal religion. And patriarchal religion's 4,000 years of fascistic control over female reproduction. The problem cannot be solved, will not be solved, short of mass annihilation until and unless women regain complete sexual autonomy. And this means the priests and holy men must give up their unwholesome urges to possess and to explain human suffering rather than to end it. They must also give up their nasty and peculiar urges to control and manipulate human genitalia and reproductive organs as holy men rather than as lovers. This too, in a normal world, just is not done. The anti-abortion movement in America calls itself pro-life. In fact, it is pro-fetus, period. Championing a fetus is easy. The mother's body is doing all the work. What is hard to change the world so that millions and millions of children have a chance for some kind of what is hard is to change the world so that millions and millions of children have a chance for some kind of qualitative life after they are born. This is the only genuine pro-life work. If the anti-abortion movement presented a consistent pro-life gestalt, wait a minute, y'all. I got because this is right here. She's saying something. Even though this is like written in 1980, she's saying something. She's still saying something. Whew. All right. The anti-abortion movement in America calls itself pro-life. In fact, it is pro-fetus, period. Championing a fetus is easy. The mother's body is doing all the work. What is hard is to change the world so that millions and millions of children have a chance for some kind of qualitative life after they are born. This is the only genuine pro-life work. If the anti-abortion movement presented a consistent pro-life gestalt in the whole range of their political and religious beliefs, then they would be presenting an ethical position worthy of respect, if not agreement. But this is not the case. The overwhelmingly majority of white Christian American pro-lifers display consistently biophobic voting records, hawkish on war, supportive of every Pentagon budget, supportive of nuclear proliferation, pro-cruise in Europe. They are marked by a flag-waving, Bible-toting, political, religious hostility to any idea of peaceful coexistence with the USSR, with Cuba, with Nicaragua. They tend to oppose negotiation for life with any government they consider demonic, i.e. leftish, but one cannot be pro-holy war and pro-life both. The terms cancel each other out, especially in a nuclear world. In domestic areas, the anti-abortionists are consistently and militantly opposed to all social welfare programs that allow children after birth to receive decent nutrition, medical care, shelter, and education, or even a dream of social and economic equity when they grow up. Most anti-abortionists, led by Ronald Reagan, are even on record in opposition to programs like WIC, which try to provide minimal nutritional and medical care for poor pregnant women. In February 1985, the Physicians Task Force on Hunger in America announced that hunger, chronic malnourishment, and undernourishment has reached epidemic proportions in America. But the most visible anti abortionists align themselves on the side of a president, an administration, and a mindset that has publicly stated that allegations of rampant hunger simply cannot be documented, and which has pointed to the existence of very tall black basketball players and fat welfare mothers, i.e., women who live on cheap starch and lard, as evidence that no one is badly fed in America. In 1983, in Detroit, Michigan, with depression level unemployment in the automobile factories, combined with massive state and federal cutbacks in food and medical assistance programs, the public health department announced that infant mortality rates in some sections of the city had reached levels comparable to the infant death rate in Honduras, which is one of the poorest countries in Central America. Furthermore, there has been an epidemic rise in childhood cancer. Once rare, it is now the second major cause of death among children, with 6,000 new cases reported each year in America, and the rise is attributable primarily to chemical pollution of the environment. But all government funding for research into children's vulnerability to environmental contamination, research that was begun under the Carter administration, was cut off totally by the Reagan administration. The most visible politicians involved in the anti-abortion movement have, in their voting records, supported all budget cuts. Are the pro-lifers out ranting and rallying to get these budget cuts restored? No. This is not to say that abortion is the answer to all our problems of malnutrition, malregulation of industry, and maldistribution of wealth and resources. The argument is simply that to be righteously supportive of a fetus's full term within the womb and then to entirely abandon it after it is born is ludicrous. When one reads the total gestalt of the anti-abortionist movement, wait a minute. I'm just making notes. When one reads the total gestalt of the anti-abortionist movement in America, it is clear to see that the average pro-lifer is not pro-life at all, certainly not pro-quality of life. Rather, they are pro-control. Their obsession is the old Bronze Age fundamentalist patriarchal obsession to control female sex and reproduction. Pro-life men, in particular, like those who firebomb abortion clinics for the glory of God, reveal their pastoralist belief that human life derives from divine male sperm and that the human female is simply a vessel containing this life for God. In her research into the motivations of pro-life women, Faye Ginsburg, in her essay, The Body Politic, the defense of sexual restriction by anti-abortion activists, found a more sophisticated and secular complex of reason. Anti-abortion women activists tend to feel that abortion rights are a key part of a whole feminist agenda that threatens their vocation as housewives and mothers. In a patriarchal culture that gives women few chances for employment, in a patriarchal culture that gives women few chances for employment in interesting careers or just well-paid jobs, the vocation of white middle-class housewife is definitely an attractive occupation. Most of us, if we are honest, can sympathize with these women's desire to hold on to their domestic roles and to the mystique of these roles. But it must be pointed out that this motivation has nothing to do with the fetus or with the problems of poor women, single mothers, or working women. It is a motivation of understandable but limited self-interest. Further, it compounds the incorrect perception that motherhood and marriage are always synonymous, and that the abortion problem would be resolved if all these single, loose, and lascivious women would just stop having sex or get married. Bitches! The problem is not, nor has it ever been, this simple. Finally, no matter how deeply devoted anti-abortion women activists might be to their homes and their domestic well-being, they have never, as a group, been able to wrest enough political power away from the right-wing husbands to ensure, via adequate compassionate funding, the healthy and happy home life nourishment, healthcare, education, and general well being of all those other women's fetuses after they are born. The concern for the fetus alone is a blind, if not hypocritical sentiment, easy to indulge in because it requires nothing. It demands nothing of the person indulging such a sentiment. The concern for the entire human life following birth is a genuine human passion because it requires everything. It demands everything from us. Pro life must mean more than an obsession with fetuses rolling down an assembly line of passive maternal flesh. It must mean a commitment to changing the world so that every child who enters it enters a place worth living in, i.e., it means that every righteous anti abortionist on earth must put his or her money, time, and thought where his or her mouth is currently working all alone. In the words of the Southwest poet Will Inman, where are those who call abortion murder? Where do they hide the milk? How do they spend their money? What do they plant in the mouths of their young? Perhaps the hardest part of the abortion issue for women as well as men to deal with is a point that is never raised or discussed thoroughly: a woman's right to make life and death decisions. Certainly, we live in a world in which a relative handful of ruling military, business, and political people wield life and death decision making power over all of us and over the entire continuing life of Earth all of the time. They have allocated to themselves such awesome power with our permission. At any moment, they can make the decision to obliterate us with nuclear missiles, sicken and destroy us with various kinds of chemical and nerve gases, drag us off to concentration camps or torture chambers, yes, even in America, force us or our children into armies, send our sons, perhaps our daughters, off to death or mutilation in any number of dubiously necessary world conflicts. Certainly, we don't like this situation, but we live with it every day. Under 4,000 years of patriarchal conditioning, we have come to accept it as normal or given that any number of selected groups of men should hold absolute life and death power over our lives and over our children's lives, at least in certain designated situations, the situations defined and designated by men. We have also given power to a larger number of people than we care to think about to make decisions affecting the issues of diminished life and slow death for many, many people, including ourselves. These are issues of environmental pollution, industrial safety, chemicals in our foods, the whole universe of imperfectly tested medicines and drugs. At this moment, someone somewhere can be making a decision about putting something into the air, the water, the food chain, the school building, the automobile upholstery that somewhere down the line, 20 years from now, will kill us or kill a child or someone else we value and love. We all know such decisions are being made every day by decent and anonymous people. We prefer not to think about it, but this does not stop the decisions from being made. For women, the issue of life and death decision making power in someone else's hands is even more quotidian. Everywhere women go in this world, the male sex holds the power of life and death over us. Men can beat us, rape us, cage us in their loony bins and torture labs, force us into demeaning and life endangering labor, sweatshop labor, factory work, street prostitution, childbearing, or illegal abortion in exchange for our daily bread or the lives of our living children. The life and death power of the male sex over the female sex has become such a substructure of every moment, act, and fact of our lives. It has come to seem normal to many people. Are men gods? No, but they have, over 4 millennia of male domination, allocated themselves to such godlike powers over us. Men rarely question their right to wield these powers. They believe it does come from God, their version of God. In fact, the exclusive male right to decide over life and death defines patriarchal power. The army of God, anti-abortionist men who wave the Bibles in the faces of pregnant women going into the clinics to have abortions, the fundamentalist men who talk so much about God's law in regard to female reproductive choice are the same men who would agree absolutely with the absolute power given to biblical patriarchs by God over the lives of their families. The kind of divinely mandated power that gave Hebrew fathers the right to stone their daughters to death if they were suspected of being non virgins before marriage. The daughter's mother had no say in the matter. She just had to stand by and watch her daughter being stoned to death. For the great crime of having a non intact hymen, perhaps a condition occurring, doctors tell us, in about 50% of the female population by mere accident. The God fearing men who are so concerned with the fetus happen to believe in a God who gave fathers the right to kill their living children at any time if they were considered disobedient or corrupt. Is this the same God who forbids a woman to abort a fetus? Yes, it is. Because the biblical God and the fundamentalist men who waved his holy book under the noses of pro abortion women are not involved in a religion of life, but in a religion of male control. Fundamental to this religion and this control is a male's exclusive right to make life and death decisions. Abortion represents woman's right to make such decisions, and the fundamentalist men cannot bear the thought of sharing such ontological power with women. They oppose abortions not because they care mightily about the fetus. By their historic record, they show they never have. But they do care mightily about retaining this exclusive male power over life and death. For it is this power which keeps them in power. And it must be pointed out that under historic patriarchy, women's non possession of such ontological life and death decision making power has done nothing to counteract men's possession and use of such power, i.e., our harmlessness has not kept him from doing harm on the historical scale of the past 4,000 bloody years. Our meekness has not influenced him to be meek, but has often, on the contrary, provoked him to greater violence. It is that revenge against feminine hermeticism, that masculine, desperate attempt to obtain a response from a body we feel is insensible, that Octavio Paz speaks of, that religious female humility and non-action against which macho sadism seems compelled to beat its fists. My. But it isn't only men who are terrified by the possibility of women regaining our ontological life and death deciding powers. Women fear it intensely and for good reason. Ontological power equals ontological responsibility. A woman who is totally conscious that she is making a life and death decision for which she alone is cosmically answerable, such a woman can never be a little girl again. Never again daddy's good little girl or God's sweet angel or all the rest of the situational epithets designed to inculcate in females a chronic state of cosmic non-responsibility, i.e., a personal non-attention to or avoidance of the universal life and death resonance and holistic repercussion of the effects of her choices, i.e., she can never be a non-thinking human being again. And this is what the world needs from women: a lot of hard ontological life and death thinking that is neither distracted nor discouraged nor beaten down by 4,000 years worth of male God sermonizing about what life is, what God is, what woman is, what man is, what it's all supposed to be about in this pre-programmed, pre-fabricated, pre-arranged, and preposterous patriarchal chapter and verse propaganda script which everyone has followed for too long as holy writ. As Paul Virilio points out in Pure War, women have been patted on the head and patronizingly absolved of life and death thinking for generations. The big man, the father, the husband, the priest, the boss, the king, the president, the military leader, takes heavy, bloody, scary life and death cerebration out of our hands and says, "Here, darling, let me do that for you." And now, at last, at the possible end, that is, of humanity, we see where this leads. If it is not to be too late for all of us, all women on a global scale have got to regain our ancient ontological power and intuitive skill for making life and death decisions, for they are always linked. Life and death are linked. To decide at the root about life, about what life is and could be, women must also know how to decide at the root about death, about what death is for, what death means to life. Millions of women worldwide thrown into life and death situations of warfare, torture, mass rape, political slavery, and all the rest. Millions of third world women and of minority women in the United States also. Black, Chicano, Native American, Asian, have grown up being forced to make and live with heavy ontological life and death decisions. This is what the more sheltered average American white woman perceives as their strength. It is strength, the often bitterly won authority of being utterly alone and responsible at the very root of things. Life and death, always twining around each other like poisonous snakes who are also lovers. All women, and maybe the highly sheltered average American white woman, most of all, must begin the daily practice of wrestling with these twin twined serpents. For that is how the ontological muscles are developed. That is how the sexual and the spiritual powers are intertwined. That is how females regain the evolutionary memory and habit of being cosmic women once again. I.e., that is how God re-becomes female. Ooh, woo. Shit. Shit. Now, as women cease being passive vessels of the divine male sperm, we cease being passive vessels of male ideology, including the patriarchal priesthood's image of God. And this is probably the ultimate challenge to the Christian church and to all the patriarchal religions which depend for their existence on the passive receptacleness of women as handmaidens to male activity, as mothers who are relied on to inculcate the received male God image into their children's brains and nervous systems, as fertile proliferators of crowded and pressed, let me just say it over. And this is probably the ultimate challenge to the Christian church and to all the patriarchal religions which depend for their existence on the passive receptacleness of women as handmaidens to male activity, as mothers who are relied on to inculcate the received male God image into their children's brains and nervous systems, as fertile proliferators of crowded and repressed or rich and repressive congregations. This is the real challenge presented by feminist issues, including abortion rights, to the fundamentalist religions and to the liberal ones as well. Female sexual autonomy equals female mental autonomy, and both together add up to female spiritual autonomy. When women begin to define our own lives, including being ontologically responsible for each life we chose to bring or not to bring into the world, then women will become fully functioning definers of the world. And then we will be fully responsible for the kind of world, the spiritual and physical quality of world into which we bring new life. And this is undoubtedly the root fear of patriarchal religions and their priesthoods and devoted followers, that someday half the world's population will get up off its knees, throw down the mops and the prayer beads and the whole dreary catechism of subliminally mumbled words and just walk out of the house of God for good, leaving no one to mop the floor and walking out into a larger world that is so inherently spiritual in its own right, just as it is, evolutionarily perceived by eyes clear at last. It will need no priests or preachers or prefabricated holy scripts to define or explain itself to us. The world and its life will then be self-evident, just as the entire living universe is self-evident. How could it be otherwise? To itself. And if we are here at all, we are here as organic parts of itself. And the man and woman will be as gods are grains of sand tumbled by the night sea, or dust balls rolling over the church floor. And the patriarchal priesthoods will be left alone with this, to mop their own floors. Shit now. She be snapping. The third point is that women must do this very soon, or we might never again, or never for a long time, be free to do it. Free, that is, in the sense of being autonomous and whole. Advances in reproductive technology and the worldwide spread of technological control over female reproduction as a function of political and corporate power over worker populations threatens all women with global exploitation as state or business controlled breeding machines. This means having our eggs, our uteruses, our hormonal systems engineered and used not in our own interest but as functions of the global assembly line that mass produces human beings to order along with everything else. This is not a brave new world fantasy. The basic technology exists, is in use, and is being refined and elaborated every day. Every time a third world woman is coerced into surgical sterilization, every time fertility control drugs considered too dangerous for Western women to use are dumped and pushed on populations of third world women, every time an American egg mother has her eggs fertilized in vitro and reinserted into her womb, or her fertilized eggs transplanted into the womb of another woman, every time lightweight Y-bearing sperm is collected in a test tube and allowed to dive quickly to the bottom while the heavier X-bearing sperm remaining floating on the top, thus separating the father's male and female sex chromosomes and consequently allowing a couple to choose to have the woman impregnated with a male child. Each incident constitutes experimental research and is a part of a vaster research and experimental program aimed at complete technological control over human reproduction. Scientists might deny this or call it exaggeration, but history shows us scientists rarely know what they are doing. They always express an ingenious surprise when they finally figure out to what uses business, politics, and the military have put their innocent little laboratory discoveries. Further, Western scientists are themselves thoroughly enmeshed in the gears of the machinery of control which they have helped to invent. They are in fact employed by it, and they are not funded so generously by governments to be renegades or even wise people. Alicia says, I always took it as different ways of men wants us only for them outside of that. Wait a minute. I always took it as different ways. Men wants us only for them outside of that is sin or impulsive when we have the same. Okay, Alicia is saying right. It's like it's sin or impulsive when we have the same. It's sin on us or impulsive on us when we have the desires, but not so when it's on the men. I believe that's what you're saying. But you can clarify. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Many thoughtful members of minority populations in the United States and the West generally, Black, Native American, Chicano, and Asian people strongly, yes, while they do. Yes. Many thoughtful members of minority populations in the United States and the West generally, Black, Native American, Chicano, and Asian people strongly oppose abortion and sterilization and are very suspicious of all birth control projects because they see correctly that personal birth control can easily become a political tool of population control aimed at them by dominating white governments. Population control can effectively equal time capsule genocide. Throughout Africa, India, Asia, and other parts of the third world, Western technological humanists promote birth control and sterilization as a key facet of industrial economic developmental programs. Their operating premise or pretense is that problems of famine, poverty, disease, lack of education, and economic development, etc., are all blamable on overpopulation, i.e., those savages just breed like flies. That's what they say. This neatly absolves their own Western imperialist cultures and the whole machinery of political, economic, and religious colonization from all responsibility in the creation and maintenance of these problems. Most third world women are fully aware that the fertility control and sterilization programs urged or forced on them as part of the Western economic industrial design development programs are just a contemporary phase of the same old ongoing colonization and control imperialism. It is the habit of Western white women to think of such problems as happening elsewhere. But with the spread of the global factory system and the consequent outsourcing of so many American jobs and industries to the low-wage countries of the third world, With the malignant overdevelopment of military economies at the expense of domestic economies, and the consequent non development or de development of Western societies to the point that Paul Virilio calls Indo-colonization, i.e., Western nations will themselves become functional colonies of their own governmental wait a minute. With the malignant overdevelopment of military economies at the expense of domestic economies, and the consequent non development or de development of Western societies to the point that Paul Virilio calls it Indo colonization, i.e., this is where Western nations will themselves become functional colonies of their own governmental, business, and military establishments, now grown to politically uncontrollable global proportions. And with the necessity of conducting the most elaborate and refined reproductive technology and genetic engineering experiments, initially at least, on relatively affluent white Western couples or single women who can afford them, there will soon be no elsewhere. Further, some Western women have even welcomed the envisioned co optation of their female biological functions by advanced reproductive technologies. Feminists such as Shulamith Firestone have expressed the idea that women will not be free until babies are grown entirely in test tubes, until the complete female reproductive process is taken over by medical technology. This seems to echo Christ's dictum that females will be freed by becoming male. Other women believe just the opposite, that historically, the increasing process of male control over reproduction has equaled male control over the female sex, one way or another. And even further into sci fi horror, once patriarchally oriented men are able to technologically, mechanically reproduce themselves, women will rapidly achieve the status of a dispensable population. These men will also be able to reproduce their own ideal sexual servo mechanisms. Both sides of this debate get lurid because the situation calls for it. Do we become free by having machines and biotechnology take over all of our physical functions? I.e., is freedom a technological state? Or is it an ontological state, achievable only when a biological, spiritual, conscious organism is able to experience autonomy of all its functions, rather than a substitution of its functions? Many contemporary Western women can sense what's going on here by considering the whole movement of pregnant women in the past 2 decades away from medical control of their pregnancies and childbirths, the reappearance of midwives, the use of herbal medications and massage and other benign techniques to ease labor, home births in low-lit, cozy atmospheres without intrusion of forceps, stirrup position, delivery room, professionalism and glare, etc. Women have become reacquainted with our own basic sexual bodies, and the experience has brought a sense of both calm and empowerment. We find that for the most part, our bodies know what they are doing and how to do it. Most of the time, we can trust them to perform pretty well, if not absolutely brilliantly. And when it comes to having babies, we now find that women are doing it rather than asking doctors to do it for us. Isn't it interesting now, of all times, the business of reproductive technology blooms? Amniocentesis, genetic screening, counseling and engineering, fetal monitoring during labor, surrogate motherhood, and all the rest, all designed to get pregnancy and childbirth back into the hands of the experts, i.e., highly trained intellects surrounded by machinery, designed originally perhaps for special cases and emergency situations. This very expensive reproductive technology will rapidly become normative, just to pay for itself. And the day might very soon arrive when women who refuse to take advantage of such technologies will be considered not only backward but bad mothers. With the mere existence of these technologies of reproductive engineering and control will come inevitably a social expectation that every child be born perfect. People who refuse the technologies and give birth to imperfect babies will be seen as morally, if not legally, guilty. And so, once more, pregnant women will be socially coerced into relying on the medical expertise of trained reproductive technologists and will not be allowed by their societies, their mates, their own fears to trust or experience the wise, organic autonomy of their own female bodies, which most of the time really do know what they're doing and how to do it. I'll just say here, this is why I am right now studying midwifery. I am planning to become a midwife. I'm also working on the birth doula certification and a childbirth educator certification for this very reason. And I'm also teaching a womb activation tutorial um, for this very reason right here, so that we do not feel any less confident about allowing our bodies to do what our bodies naturally know how to do. So I just wanted to put that in there. Another lurid twist of the umbilical noose looms on the horizon. It is wrapped in the American it is wrapped in the American neoconservative economic theory called law and economics. Developed mainly at the University of Chicago's law school under the aegis of Dr. Milton Friedman and Dr. George Stigler and their followers, Law and Economics proposes that all legal questions, including rape, murder, adoption, abortion, child custody, can be reduced to the economic terms of the free enterprise market system. That is, all legal and moral questions can be economically quantified and decided by the law in terms of their monetary value or cost to a society. For example, as law and economics theorist and author Richard Posner has argued, if a law like the exclusionary rule, which forbids courts to accept evidence illegally obtained, is decided to impose too great a private and social cost on the government, then the exclusionary rule is not economically viable and should be thrown out of the legal system. Other law and economics theorists have critiqued antitrust workers' compensation and minimum wage laws on the same basis, arguing the cost to society of enforcing them outweighs their overall benefit. In other words, law and economics reduces legality to the market, and in so doing, reduces what we think of as personal and social morality to the dollar as well. Richard Posner, a graduate of the University of Chicago's Law School and currently a U.S. Appeals Court Justice, is also one of the major definers and exponents of law and economics theory. He has advocated, as an example of law and economics in action, full legalization of medical experimentation on people in prison, arguing that such experimentation is both morally and legally justifiable if it were shown persuasively that the social benefits of such experiments greatly exceeded the cost. In 1978, together with Elizabeth Landis, Posner published an essay in the Journal of Legal Studies, which further elaborated his view of the extensibility of law and economics to our daily lives. The essay was called The Economics of the Baby Shortage. In it, Posner and Landis argued that the current child adoption system should be replaced by the free market system, in which babies available for adoption would just be sold to the highest bidder. Describing the advantages of such a baby market, Posner and Landis wrote, at a higher price for babies, the incidence of abortion, the reluctance to part with an illegitimate child, and even the incentive to use contraceptives would diminish because the cost of unwanted pregnancy would be lower, while the cost to the natural mother of retaining her illegitimate child would rise. Thus, the effect of legalizing the baby market would be not only to shift the marginal cost of baby production. Love you, Alicia. Thus, the effect of legalizing the baby market would be not only to shift the marginal cost of baby production and sale downward, but to move the demand curve for adoptive children upward. In a regime of free baby production and sale, there might be efforts to breed children with a known set of characteristics that could be matched up with those desired by prospective adoptive parents. What a curious mixture of Bronze Age fundamentalist moralism with the 20th century free enterprise profit motive. Women who become mothers without permission, i.e., outside of patriarchal marriage, will be punished by making it economically impossible for them to keep their babies. But we will not call it punishment. We will call it economic incentive. A woman with an unwanted pregnancy will be forced to remain pregnant, for the baby market system has eliminated abortion, but this is not punishment either. She will get paid for producing a baby. What a curious and chilling echo of the Bronze Age patriarchal priesthood's lust to simultaneously control, punish, and exploit for profit the sexual reproductive activity of women. Combined with the total, unabashed decadence of Western capitalism's urge to reduce all life to commodity and commodity exchange, while human feelings and the human spirit are simply bought off. And when we consider the ethical characters of some of the world's wealthiest people, we can only wonder what male god is going to be there to protect the interests of the little girl and boy babies sold by the millions to the highest bidders, which they doing that already. There is really not much more to say about law and economics or the economics of baby making, except that Richard Posner is one of President Ronald Reagan's favorite jurists and legal economic theorists. It was Reagan who appointed him in 1982 to the appeals court of the District of Columbia. And when it comes time for Reagan to appoint a Supreme Court justice between now and 88, Reagan could appoint as many as 5 new justices. Richard Posner is considered very near the top of the list of probable appointees. Posner is a young man, 46, and could serve on the Supreme Court a very long time. Now, what is the machine? The machine has been called man's baby, sometimes man's true lover. It is also patriarchal man's version of the world mother. The machine is man's transformation ritual, his magic uterus of mass production. The machine is a man made system, device, or theology, philosophy for converting world energy, animal, vegetable, or mineral, into human wealth. Under 4,000 years of patriarchal religious economic systems, human wealth has meant the conversion of the energy of the many into the profit and power of the few. The primary mechanism of this energy conversion has been the control and exploitation of the female reproductive process, simultaneous with the repression and punishment of female sexual autonomy. Through the energy suppression and conversion mechanism of piety and drudgery, female sexual biological energy has been maintained and controlled in a chronic process of productive repression. And this machine model for controlling and using female sexual reproductive energy has also been applied to the control and exploitation of workers' productive labor. The machine, a patriarchal hierarchic system for exploiting and diverting female sexual reproductive energy into wealth and profit, is now used, of course, to exploit and co opt the energies of most of the world's males also. The machine converts kangaroos and whales into dog food, ancient forests into toothpicks, and the oily black blood and metallic veins of Earth into nuclear, missile, beer cans, and smog. The history of mankind from Neanderthals to now has been a slow but logarithmically increasing development of the organic into the mechanical, of the primally simple into the artificially complex. In Paul Virilio's terms, it has been a development from the gradual speed of geophysical space to the instantaneous space of electronic time. In psychoanalytical terms, it has been the history of the implacable overcoming of the matristic oral by the patristic anal. The past 4,000 years has been accomplished via the total physical and ideological repression of the female body. The next stage depends on the total physical and economic mechanization of the female body. The global assembly line turning out consumer junk and human consumers will be the great machine mother of the world, with the eggs, uteruses, and hormone systems of living women attached to it, one way or another, in servo mechanistic functions. The current rage for female bodies trussed up in chains, discipline frames, and even rubber and metal garter belts turns some people on specifically because it mechanizes female flesh. The media mechanizes female flesh by making it available directly to the brain via disembodied light technology. A good deal of contemporary pornography has to do not with the eroticization of the flesh, but with the eroticization of the mechanization of the flesh. She wears all the metallic jewelry of torture. Increasing numbers of men in the world today are turned on solely or primarily by torture's metalloid mechanistic thrills. The triumph of the anal sadistic necrophilic machine equals the total mechanization of the female body. She is screwed by machine and she produces mechanically. Patriarchal man has undoubtedly lusted after woman in his heart as a sexual body. Even more, he has lusted after motherhood. The control of female sex and reproduction through his jealous the control of female sex and reproduction through his jealous father gods and misogynist priesthoods has been his mode of experiencing ersatz motherhood. He has owned the female reproductive machinery like the factory owner owns productive machinery, like the pastoralist owns cows. In modern reproductive technologies, the same lust is evident. To know the secret mechanisms of reproduction is to own the secret of life. Patriarchal technological man has spent many centuries spying to capture the secret, as we all know. What the boss does with the factory machinery, the biotechnologist can now do in the laboratory. Control and program the mechanical process of reproduction production, i.e., he too can be a mother, if motherhood is defined as mechanical breeding. Early results of this machinery can be seen in fertility drugs, which tend to mass produce sextuplets and septuplets. For life, if approached mechanistically, is certainly capable of a mechanistic response. In particular, since mechanical replication is one part of the life process, as Heidegger pointed out in the question concerning technology, it is precisely this replicative assembly line aspect of the life process that we keep soliciting with our technologies and with our technologically oriented ideologies. The more we relate to life as mechanisms to a cosmic machine rather than as organisms to a cosmic organism, the more fiendishly mechanoid will be its response. The DNA will roll out like Fords and Subarus, and we will all be made by God and global corporations as production units with interchangeable parts. By God, i.e., this will seem normative in a mechanically self-justifying system. Everyone is caught in this machinery. There is nowhere to go to escape it except inward to a definition of life as conscious organism rather than stupid mechanism. This is the only way we can stop life from becoming nothing but stupid mechanism. The process of redefinition begins with women reclaiming total sexual and reproductive autonomy. If the female body can be controlled or used in any way from the outside via exploitative definitions or systems, then so it follows can everything else. The definition and use of the female body is the paradigm for the definition and use of all things. If the autonomy of the female body is defined as sacred, then so will be the autonomy of all things. Patriarchal men have tried to pretend that males can be free while females can be dominated and enslaved, just as white imperialists have pretended that they can be independent and soulful beings in private life while publicly colonizing and brutalizing darker peoples. Now we see that everyone involved in a dominating machine is dominated and mechanized by it. Now we can also see that after 4,000 years of systematic physical and ideological domination of the female sexual and reproductive processes by men, there is no free man left on earth. If the source of life is defined not as conscious autonomous organism but as stupid usable machine, then everybody gets caught in this definitive machinery, the definers as well as the defined. Biological beings are not analogous to machinery. 4,000 years ago, patriarchal religion and culture began forcibly defining biological beings, and primarily the female being, in mechanistic, exploitable terms. Since then, because behavior follows definition, the human world has undergone a logarithmically accelerating process of mechanization. Patriarchal religion emptied biology of spirit and of consciousness through its machine dualisms of fleshly body versus divine mind, of material evil versus abstract goodness. In this way, it destroyed the Neolithic goddess religion and enslaved female beings. Patriarchal science followed with its eventually Cartesian definitions of a totally mechanoid deadness of matter being acted upon, objectively observed, manipulated by the detached male mind. Even though modern physics and biology have once again redefined life as a magically organic process arranged and rearrangeable by subjective perception, our world religions, laws, social structures, and customs continue to follow the now obsolete patriarchal definition of life as stupid mechanism. Mm, mm, mm. So we have forgotten. So we have forgotten or have not yet been allowed to remember that biological beings are not analogous to machinery. In the continuous spiraling of evolution devolution, biology is a spiritual process and spirit is a biological process. Spiritual energy fuels our biological organisms, and biological energy fuels our spiritual experiences. Biology and spirituality, sexuality and spirituality cannot be separated without destroying the living holism and producing dead mechanism. Robot sex, robot piety, robot labor, robot existence. To reclaim the biological process as a numinous process is to reclaim the original process of the earth, which is a geological, biological, spiritual being capable of consciousness and of conscious relationship to its creatures. The magic is in the molecules, the dance of energy. Solid rock and human flesh are in the imagination of earth. Women originally knew this, as did men, through tens of thousands of years of biological, spiritual experiencing of primal earth as a reciprocal mother. Spirit and sex were not separate, dualized, or antagonistic, but experienced as twin serpents or energy flows interlocked and spiraling around each other. When women knew this, men knew it too. It was experienced as ontological reality. Earth and life haven't changed. Our definitions of reality have been changed, allowing us to perceive and experience only the most mechanistic aspects of the life process. The deep structure of the imagination remains the same, where we experience biology and spirit as unified. This is where we are in dreams, with natural hallucinogens like peyote and mushrooms, and in art sometimes. Religious ritual was once a major mode of experiencing direct communication between the sexual, spiritual, and imaginations of human creatures and the evolutionary numinous imagination of Earth. Patriarchal religion turned this open channel into a blocked road with its substitution of moralistic, necrophilious ritual for the ancient pagan rituals of biological epiphany. Now it is time to return. If we can't unblock the road with the dynamite of revolutionary consciousness, then we must build a new way back with the slower, steadier energy of consciousness in evolution. Because patriarchy began by taking possession of the female body as property and as stupid machinery, the way back begins with women reclaiming full sexual and reproductive autonomy, not in pursuit of cheap thrills or of equality within the present system, which is a dead system, but in pursuit of the original holism of biological, spiritual beings. Evolving, sexually numinous beings who cannot experience themselves ontologically if they are habitually being defined and self defined as mechanisms or as moralistic property. This means that the question of whether to be pregnant or not pregnant must be returned to female intuition, which, when it is healthy, strong, and self defined, is the voice of the sexual spiritual energies interlocked and working, muscularly flowing together. A pregnant woman or a woman deciding on pregnancy or non pregnancy is not a situation analogous to any other situation. Neither male logic nor male theology apply to female reproduction. to pregnancy or to contraception or to abortion, because male logic and male theology derive from beings who never become pregnant, use contraception, give birth, or have abortions. Well, then, say that. Shit. In relation to female sex and reproduction, male logic and male theology are spectator sports. But pregnancy, childbirth, and even abortion are participation rituals. Nor does man's busyness apply. Female bodies are not man's business. A woman is a specialist in her own situation. In a world that worships specialists, how strange that men refuse to recognize women as specialists in our own bodies and processes and allow us to function accordingly. The fundamentalist preachers and Catholic priests and other holy men who want to forbid women contraception and abortion, and the technological humanist fertility control experts trying to force contraception, abortion, and sterilization on third world women are the same mentality and are doing the same number on women, trying to take over the female functions of organic reproduction, organic birth control, organic population limitation, and run these according to the amateurish notions of male logic and male theology. Overpopulation is a code word, a symptom word for the failure of all male-dominated systems designed to control and exploit the female process for God and profit. Women decide to be pregnant or not, period. That is the beginning and end of population control. Say that shit. In the abortion debates, one of the questions most frequently raised, wait a minute, let me just, because I got to come back to this and suck it all up again. You know what I'm saying? Say that shit loud, baby. Shit. Okay? In the abortion debates, one of the questions most frequently raised is, when does life begin? The question is quasi-mechanistic, suggesting some ideal point on a linear scale before which abortion is right and after which abortion is not right. A popular placard and slogan carried by anti-abortionists in demonstrations and rallies illustrates the same mentality. A photo of a bouncing, beautiful baby is shown with the words, if you take her life now, it's murder. If you take her life 12 months ago, it's abortion. The problem with this reasoning is this: life does not begin. It's always here. Nature is alive from the beginning and prodigal. Life does not emerge from us. We emerge from it. Pregnancy and childbirth are ritual passages of eternal life through the bodies of autonomous women. From the first cell floating on the first sea at the first outbreath of the world, it has all been alive. Life does not begin with the fertilized egg or embryo. Male sperm is alive. The female ovum is alive. Technically, as we've said, the female egg could mate with its own polar body and produce a daughter clone all by itself. Yet each month of her life, if a woman does not become pregnant, one of these incredible eggs goes down the drain, taking with it all its potential life. With each human male ejaculation, about 2 million sperm are wasted, condemned to not become. For each single sperm that enters an egg and begins with the egg to form an embryo, 1,999,999 of its fellow sperm do not. Nature is extremely alive and extremely prodigal, and continuous waste and death occurs within a continuous sea of life. And that continuity is both a cycle and a continuum. Thus, the question, when does life begin, is asked along and of that continuum. A 3-month fetus, if not aborted, will indeed grow into a bouncing baby. But if the continuum is reversed and followed backward, when does that life begin? A 3-month fetus projected back 3.5 months along the continuum separates into a female egg and a male sperm, alive within 2 distinct bodies of a man and a woman. Most women, especially beginning a menstrual period, have had the experience of wondering, deeply sometimes with overwhelming tears, just what that tiny egg might have become. Nature is prodigal, and life's potential is even more so. The female egg was once itself enclosed within an embryo, and before that was a potential egg within another egg, on and on and on, back through apes Forest shrews, lizards, star acorns, algae, the first molecule. Back to the first imagination of a sea of night filled with nothing. Where does life begin? This is not an argument intended to prove that abortion is right or wrong. It's just to say that life happens always along a continuum. And all the decisions we make are always decisions made along a continuum. Any fixed point designated along that continuum is always understood to be arbitrary. That is the best we mortals can do if we are utterly honest with ourselves and with life. In the abortion debate, the earnest search for that point when life begins is understandable but futile. There will never be any final determination of the question because the closer we look, the clearer we see that life does not begin. On Earth, it recedes to the origins of Earth, and beyond that to the origins of the universe. And certainly with the elaboration and refinement of reproductive technology, the age in months and weeks and days at which a fetus will be able to survive outside the mother's womb will also recede backward along that continuum to a point where the entire questioning of beginning life becomes as technologically inappropriate as it is now biologically inappropriate. This fixation on a logically, empirically determinable point in space or number of days at which life can be said to begin is another symptom of a cultural, ideological fixation on mechanical quantity rather than organic quality. It also derives from the patriarchal pastoralist notion that life is not divine until male sperm enters the female womb, which from that point on is a passive container in which God's child grows. In the view of others, God is a woman and the child is not property but embodied spirit. The continuum is also a cycle, a spiraling out and in, and what has come once when the time is wrong can come once again when the time is right. The point is that the entire question and answer changes with a change of the sex of God or the change of a straight line into a spiral. The opposite of life is not death, but to become a mechanism. Women forced against their wills or instincts to give birth like breeding machines in the name of the sacred fetus is a travesty of life. Sacred beings do not pass through breeding machines. Hello. Nor through women tied down by the ropes of God and required to give birth to male property or to multiply congregations. If the mother is not a sacred, autonomous being, then the fetus is neither sacred nor autonomous. If the mother is a sacred, autonomous being, then she makes her own choices about what she brings or does not bring to birth. Sacred, holy life is not born from machinery. In a lovely book, Hygeia, A Woman's Herbal, author Janine Parvati records the abortion experiences of several women in the form of journal extracts, poems, and letters. Few abortion experiences are shallow. Whatever the method used, they are normally overwhelming psychological and spiritual experiences, even when the physical trauma seems minimal. Perhaps all anti-abortionists see women as stupid cows or callow whores from whom the fetus must be rescued. But most women who've undergone abortion know that the experience is indeed a participation ritual in which a woman participates heavily and unforgettably in her own death, as well as in the death of a potential child. Few women emerge unchanged from the abortion experience, and the change is usually in the direction of greater thoughtfulness, deeper maturity, a need and a desire to listen more profoundly, gaze more intensely into the womb of one's inner experience, the bubbling crucible of life and death. Women have not had abortions and or do not approve of abortions. Women who have not had abortions and or do not approve of abortion can only be asked to consider cultivating an ontological trust of their sisters who do undergo abortion. We must begin believing or rebelieving that the female being of its original nature knows what it has to do, when it must be done, and why. If we reclaim this trust in ourselves and in other women, we are reclaiming female autonomy, and this reclamation can help create a world in which much of the pain and ugliness of abortion no longer exists. This will be a world in which females are so ontologically in touch with their bodies, so tuned into their cycles and their hormonal activity, that the processes which Janine Parvati records and describes as psychic birth control and even psychic abortion can not only occur but will predominate. Women describe experiences of being pregnant, of knowing and feeling and believing that it was not the right time or circumstance to have a child. They speak of going into meditation or into their dreams and speaking to the fetus as one sacred being to another. This is not the right time or space for us to be together. Please leave now. At the right time, we will meet again. These women practice imaging, either of actual abortion or simply imaging the embryonic blood clot breaking loose from the uterine wall and flowing downward into a blood flow. In the cases described, at least, miscarriage followed. This cannot always happen, but it is a beginning. The further along the pregnancy is, the harder it becomes and the more traumatic the miscarriage. So it is very important for women to also practice meditation and dream conversation with our entire menstrual cycles and hormonal conditions, along with, of course, many other methods of organic contraception, herbs, temperature readings, and all the rest. A woman can know she is pregnant through correctly reading her own dreams several weeks before she becomes aware of physical symptoms. Of course, the fundamentalist types might try to burn us for psychic abortions, for having conversations with our own dreams. They've done it before. And the technological types will scoff and insist it can't be done. There is no objective proof. This is all subjective nonsense, and so on, the way it goes. But each time a human female simply tries it and finds it works, the community of female re-empowerment grows stronger. The time of female re-empowerment grows closer. We will not be empowered by way of any political, economic, or social system built on the fact of our weakness. That is certain. And all present political, economic, social, and religious systems on earth are built solidly on the fact of female weakness. Living within these systems with no way out, we instead turn in and find a radically different world system inside, awaiting revolution. That is a convolution, a turning the inside out. Female autonomy always means human autonomy, just as patriarchal domination of female reproductive labor always means patriarchal domination of human productive labor. Organism means organism, as machine means machine. We either re-become children of the Great Mother, or we remain children of the machine. The opposite of life is not death, but to become a mechanism. We are now already quasi-mechanisms living within a world machine. We must extricate ourselves from the machinery, which is not truly either life or death, but the absence and the travesty of both. Politics is important. Social and cultural activity is important. Everything that can be done should be done to change our situation. But these activities cannot extricate us from the machinery if they are still conducted in the terms of the machinery. Ontological evolution and revolution must be conducted in the mode of biology and the dream. This is the mode into which machinery cannot enter. Only living beings can. We have made it to the next chapter, Beyond the Male, God and His Machine. Under Islamic law, virgins cannot be executed. So in Iranian jails, prison guards systematically gang rape young female prisoners sentenced to death, thus rendering them fit in God's eyes for execution. Pregnant women prisoners in some American jails, notably the California Institution for Women, are routinely strapped to their beds at the ankles or wrists throughout their labor and childbirth. Under 24-hour surveillance, the enchained women are unable to move, turn over during sleep, or help themselves in the most minimal way to ease labor pains, though the woman in labor is not going to be, in anyone's opinion, a great security risk. Hundreds of young women are killed yearly in India in the notorious dowry deaths, in which a young bride is set afire by her in-laws as revenge for inadequate or incompletely paid dowries. The new bride is doused with kerosene and then ignited with matches. This act is usually performed by mothers-in-law, i.e., women do this to other women in acts of stupendous greed and self-hatred, conditioned by religious ideas that define sons and males generally as spiritual beings, while daughters and other females are defined as income property. One of the most popular X-rated video games before it was removed from circulation in response to protests from Native American and feminist groups was called Custer's Revenge, in which a naked General Custer scored points by raping bound Indian women. One of the most popular X-rated films ever made is the notorious South American produced Snuff, in which a live woman is raped, mutilated, and disemboweled before the camera. This film has been shown throughout the world, and its popularity has spawned many spin-offs in which the gang rape, torture, and murder of women and also children is not simulated by actors, but really done while the cameras roll. To provide sacrificial actresses for these films is a function of the global slave trade in women and young girls. Snuff has been shown in some American prisons, ostensibly to entertain male prisoners, many of whom we can assume were imprisoned for rape and killing women. In America alone, torture pornography films are a billion-dollar business. They run the gamut from Driller Killer, in which women's skulls are drilled, to Pieces, in which college women are cut to bits by a professor with a chainsaw. The distributor of the latter hopes it will become a cult film for kids. Despite organized protests of feminists worldwide, the production and sale of torture and pornography films, home videos, and video games continues to soar, with global distribution following patterns of global development. A 1983 film called Make Them Die Slowly showed not only women but Aborigines being tortured. The National Secretary of the Moral Majority, lecturing in the early 1980s at Earlham College, a Quaker-affiliated school in Indiana, declared that the United States should have used atomic or hydrogen bombs to win the Vietnam War. Moral Majority and other fundamentalist American religious patriotic groups believe that God gave nuclear weaponry to America and that we have a moral right, indeed a moral duty, to use that weapon that God gave us. When new recruits are inducted into the Israeli Defense Forces, they are ceremonially handed a gun, number one, and number two, a copy of the Old Testament in which God commands and justifies the righteous slaughter of thousands upon thousands of unbelievers. The biblical Old Testament is a historic record of massive holy war conducted in the name of God against Gentiles and also in some cases against Jews by Jews. And most of the mutilations and massacres in it, including those of pregnant women, children, and suckling infants, are considered by its patriarchal writers to be fulfillments of the will of Yahweh. In the Pentagon, group Bible reading sessions and prayer breakfasts are on the increase in the 1980s, or at least the Joint Chiefs of Staffs are more openly under President Reagan's administration displaying their religious beliefs. At many prayer breakfasts conducted throughout America recently, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Vesey, has urged his audiences to enlist in God's army, while Admiral James Watkins, the chief of naval operations, declares in public speeches that the 1983 Beirut bombing that killed 241 Marines was the responsibility of the forces of the Antichrist. These 7 news items were not selected at random, nor do we consider them to be disconnected. They are 7 facets of a world ruled by a male God, or rather by a definition of God derived from 4,000 years of patriarchal ideological domination in which countless daily acts of aggression, human degradation, and sheer ugliness not only occur but occur inevitably as the acting out of basic patriarchal principles and premises. All these news items record the acting out of patriarchal ontology. The patriarchal godhead of all major world religions is defined as 1, a god of righteous war; 2, a dominator of women; 3, a god of wealth and hierarchic power; 4, an imperialist god who controls vast resources of wealth and power by controlling the female body and its reproductive processes as exploitable property; 5, a sexually puritanical god who defines sex as unclean and evil and thus elicits violent pornography as the sexual punishment and exorcism of women; and 6, a God who thrives on policing and punishing life itself. The world's definition of God is the self-definition of humanity. The gods who rule us from above are simply mirrors in the sky, faithfully reflecting our own faces. The gods who rule us from within might represent deep truths of the mind and heart, or they might reflect the profound self-distortions of 4 millennia of ontological misperception. We do not know if a God is a true God or a false God until we see what kind of world is created in that God's image. When we look around today at the world generated by the male gods of patriarchal rule, we see warfare, degradation, suffering, and sadism on a scale such as Earth has never seen, nor will ever see again. For, of course, if we don't end it, it will surely end us. Nor is it a problem of blood, of Muslim blood or Hindu blood or Christian blood or Jewish blood or atheist communist blood, but a problem of ideology. If we embrace an ideology of if we embrace an ideology of justified holy war, we will be forever at war and inflicting war on others. If we worship a punitive God, we will be forever punished and punishing of others. If we believe in a religion that dualizes the human sexes into mutually hostile, dominating, and submissive categories of beings, then we, as sexual human beings, will be forever dichotomized and ravaged by hostility within ourselves and among ourselves. And we will inflict our internal alienation and ravagement on everything we see forever. This is all very rudimentary, but once it has been set into motion as world machinery, every living thing on earth is entangled in its gears. All our functions become definitively embodied in its functions, and it's very hard for those living inside the machinery to stop the machine, because our lives in all their ontological terms have come to depend on the ongoing machinery in all its terms. Because as human beings, we not only work, yeah, okay. Because as human beings, we not only worship our gods, we become them. The God humanity follows. The God humanity follows is the kind of humanity we are and will be. What kind of God do we want as our definition? Will we know the answer to this more clearly as we come to understand the kind of God which for 4,000 years has been defining us? We will know the answer to this more clearly as we come to understand the kind of God which for 4,000 years has been defining us. Has been imposing its definition on us human creatures, via the machinery of patriarchal, religious, economic, and military systems. The God of patriarchy from the beginning has been a God of war and economic exploitation. Incessant warfare and economic exploitation have characterized the 4,000-year history of this male God, a time span that is very brief relative to the 300,000 to 500,000 years of humanoid life on Earth, but still long enough to make us feel as a species that it has always been this way. It is no surprise that the world of today, the apotheosis of patriarchy, is a world of war and money. What else rules us anywhere we go on Earth? The paradigm of continuous, large-scale war is the institutionalized dualism of the sexes into good spiritual males versus evil material females, i.e., male versus female is the first holy war. The paradigm of continuous large-scale economic exploitation is the institutionalized control of female reproduction by a ruling male elite, i.e., male controlling female reproduction is the first boss controlling worker production, the first assembly line domination of human energy. In the modern world, we're told there are two very different and competing economic power systems, but in fact, they are ontologically the same, deriving from the same God of war and exploitation, from the same patriarchal definition of human life as a function of some larger abstract category: God, the state, the marketplace. American-based private enterprise monopoly capitalism defines human beings and all of nature as functions of the marketplace. Soviet-based public enterprise monopoly state capitalism defines human beings and all of nature as functions of the state. What is the ontological difference? To define human beings as functions or exploitable means rather than as sacred ends in ourselves, is to create by definition a perpetual state of war. Together, these two world machines, known politically as the US and the USSR, grind away as functions of each other, producing state economies and private economies in apparent or rhetorical conflict, both in reality subservient to one global, unified war economy, which in turn serves both, in which both collude. For a perpetual war is necessary against mock enemies and against one's own people in order to maintain human beings in a perpetual condition of exploitable means rather than sacred ends in ourselves. This is why the patriarchal God begins and ends as a war god. To maintain himself in power, he must wage war against human life. His priesthoods, sacred texts, doctrines, and dogmas exist to rationalize this horrific state of incessant warfare as man's spiritual destiny. His social and economic institutions exist to provide continuous cannon fodder and spoils for continuous war. A global god of war served by the global religion of money defines the human condition today. Our various nationalities, our sectarian beliefs, our local customs, our personal opinions may serve as individual definitions, but they no longer define the condition of the world in which global missile systems and global factory economic systems have rendered national, sectarian, local, and personal definitions merely soporific and, in fact, obsolete. All humanity today lives under one global God, the God of war, who is continuously empowered and enlarged by the religion of money. The arms race is now the major global economy. The world economy is now a war economy, with virtually all national military systems and military budgets taking precedence over all domestic economies and domestic budgets. World Priorities, a nonprofit American research organization, in their published World Military and Social Expenditures for 1979, found that developing nations with populations of 660 million people who couldn't afford basic subsistence were yet spending over $90 billion a year on military power. And this was 8 years ago. In 1979, according to World Priorities, the world was investing 2,500 times more in the machinery of war than in the machinery of peacekeeping. 8 million children died in that year alone from hunger and illness related to malnutrition. America, the Earth's strongly military nation, had in 1979 over 25 million malnourished people and at least 10 million children who had never seen a doctor. In 1979, in pounds per person, the world had more explosive power than food. And this was 8 years ago, before the arms race heated up again, before the resurgence of the Pentagon budget under the Reagan administration and the consequent leap in military spending in all other countries, before the terrible famines in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Bolivia, before the cutbacks in American welfare programs and the consequent diminishment of domestic priorities and governments worldwide. According to the most recent statistics, for every soldier on Earth, the average military expenditure is $20,000 yearly. For every school-aged child, the average public education expenditure is $380. For every 100,000 people in the world, there are 556 soldiers, but only 85 doctors. For every $1 billion spent to provide 28,000 jobs in military goods and services, the same expenditure could provide 57,000 jobs in personal consumption industries and 71,000 jobs in education. As Ruth Leger-Sivard, director of World Priority, writes, quote, "The vast development problems of the 1980s, like the unbridled arms race, must be understood in human terms. It is not the world economy nor the national security that is in danger. It is people. The modern world is painfully off balance, opulently rich in arms, poor in providing for the needs of human lives. It is this social deficit that represents the most urgent threat to world security. Spending for arms not only fails to meet these needs, it intensifies them. This is the ultimate irony of the search for security through invincible military power. It threatens the society it is intended to protect. In short, what the arms race means in human terms is that more people are condemned to die of hunger and foul water, children to grow up retarded in body and mind, the special needs of the elderly to be neglected, people to live out their lives in fear and with hate. It is not only the deprived who suffer as a consequence. All of society is affected by the waste of human resources. End quote. This was what, in the 1980s? How relevant is this? But these are reasonable mortal words from a reasonable mortal woman. Looming over her, high as the sky, is a god, the war god. All the present day world is in the grip of psychic and material servitude to him. And if we review the past 4,000 years of human history, this makes perfect sense. Just as the underlying motivation of Bronze Age patriarchy was profit through war, war on the female, war on nature, war on human labor, so the ultimate goal of patriarchy must be the same, the profits of war. For 4 millennia, war has been the factual source of patriarchal power. Through the mass terror, mass rape, and mass exploitation of war, through the wartime generation of mass hysterical energy, through the war-oriented manipulation of female reproduction, through the mass conversion of human and natural resources via war into profits for the few and social order, i.e., hierarchic role playing, organized repression, and death for the many. And so let me say that again. Okay. Through the mass terror, mass rape, and mass exploitation of war, through the wartime generation of mass hysterical energy, through the war-oriented manipulation of female reproduction, through the mass conversion of human and natural resources via war into profits for the few and social order for the many, the war machine has virtually created the world as we know it, i.e., as the creator of our psychic and structural world. War is God. As both William Irwin Thompson and Paul Virilio have pointed out, the city began as a fortress. Virilio, as an urban architect, claims that the city is the result of war, at least of preparation for war, that is, of large-scale patriarchal professional warfare. And gods generate not only worlds and social orders, but also belief in those worlds and social orders, a belief that overwhelms human reason. Secular humanist liberals and reasonable mortal women have always tended to underestimate the depth and extent of the human male's identification with war as a God experience, as well as an experience of personal empowerment. It is not accidental that the government's social programs, public warfare, health, education, the environment, transportation, art and culture, etc., are identified as domestic and female, while the Defense Department's programs are always promoted as global and masculine. Nor is it coincidental that liberal male politicians who support the domestic programs are always being challenged to defend their genitals against charges of wimpiness, softness, and bleeding heartedness. Ponder that last one. Before the 1984 elections in the United States, support of young men for the Republicans was at an all-time post-World War II high. According to a New York Times article summarizing pre-election poll results, young American males, and older males too, of course, identified with the image of power projected by Ronald Reagan, in particular nationalistic warrior power represented by a tougher military posture and increased weapons spending vis-a-vis spending for soft domestic programs. One urban male professional was quoted as saying that at his workplace, the guys stick to Reagan primarily because they see the race as women versus men, with Reagan standing for the values of men, i.e., the patriarchal war god, i.e., the patriarchal war god stands for and has created a social order that empowers men to the degree that it gives them power over women and over life. As for the ruling elites to whom patriarchy has given manipulative power over both men and women, the war god has always been a profitable machine. Fueled by their money, it not only returns wealth manyfold, it also returns social order. Patriotism being so often a repressed form of revolutionary energy. Social order allows the ruling elite to enjoy the profits of war in relative peace. This machinery has worked for us for 4,000 years. Why stop now? That's what they say. So say the owners of the machinery as they collect the profits. In the past, war has always been something the ruling elite felt it could control or manage via money and political clout. That the mushrooming of the Bronze Age war gods into a nuclear god of global war threatens their own continuance seems to be overlooked data or an apotheosis they refuse to deal with. The global war god now looms over them as well as over everything else on earth. But this ontological challenge does not seem to be regulating the behavior of war financiers or the people engaged in weapons manufacture and sale, i.e., everyone underestimates the power of a god grown to global proportions in his material as well as psychic manifestations. As further evidence of the logarithmic growth of various patriarchal war gods into the global god of war is the fact that the development of the world's male populations into primarily armies or military technicians or researchers of one kind or another has become the major global channel of male energy. In the third world countries, the army has also become the major mode of male survival. While women sustain agricultural and craft work in many nations or struggle to keep themselves and their children alive in the burgeoning refugee camps created by continuous war, males are able to obtain food and shelter only by joining the army, the National Guard, or other armed policing force. Thus, the war god machinery perpetuates itself on three levels: that of belief, of profit, and of daily survival. As the patriarchal war god has become the global god of global war, the state of holy war has become global, inevitable, and continuous. As a Christian, Paul Virilio distinguishes between the historic idea of a just war and the fanatic pursuit of a holy war. But in the age of nuclear technology, there is no room or time left, in his opinion, for a just war. All war today is fanatic and also technologically devastating. All war has the potential for rapid acceleration into total war. But to maintain itself in power, the patriarchal system must maintain the world in a continuous, chronic state of war of one kind or another. Holy war is all war, i.e., it is righteous war, self justifying, whether the war is conducted between nations as classic warfare or conducted within a nation as a national guard or policing action against the nation's own people. Hardly makes a difference anymore. Further, as Virilio underscores, it doesn't even matter if wars occur or don't occur on any large scale. It is the preparation for war that maintains the military in power by draining the social sectors of all resources, money, and will. Whether we are fighting others, fighting among ourselves, or just chronically getting ready to fight, it makes no difference anymore. We are effectively ruled by the god of war. We are effectively living and dying in a habitual and structural state of perpetual war. And what is the purpose or result of such a condition? As Virilio says, unconsciousness is the aim of pure war. But as we know, or should know, consciousness is the aim of evolution. So the ultimate aim or effect of the patriarchal pursuit of profit through war is counter-evolutionary. On a mass scale, it seeks to drag us back to a state of oblivion before human consciousness began. This correlates with the urge of patriarchal religion to force a human de-evolution back to the primate state by controlling human reproduction as though it were the same as mammalian reproduction, and by denying the fact of human female evolution into a unique state via the menstrual cycle in which sex and reproduction can be separable. The female evolution away from the primates was, in a real sense, the beginning of human consciousness. A consciousness which patriarchal religion has tried to reverse via control of female sexual and reproductive activity, and which the patriarchal war god is now seeking to destroy one way or another by forcibly maintaining the human species in a state of continuous war or continuous preparation for war. Cui bono? We may well ask. And the answer is ultimately no one. But the war machinery of the war god neither asks nor answers such questions anymore. It is entirely automatic. It just keeps turning, warring, preparing for war like the apocryphal Christ. It says only, I have come to destroy the works of the female. And that is seen as all of life, all of earth, and apparently all of human consciousness. Okay. We are still within this chapter. Did I say the name of this chapter? Yeah, we are stopping right there. It's 10:30. Beyond the male god and his machine. Again, there's commentary, but there's just so much, right? There's like so much, just so much to cover. I recommend that you actually get the book, and again, you can email me, or DM me or something. And I do have like a PDF version of the book. And I also recommend, I know it's on Amazon, and I'm sure it's on some other platforms as well. But I make one overall comment before I sign off, and I just want to say that, again, I was on fire about reading this book in such a public way because um I there's this is it's a knowing inside of me. It's a rising up that it is time for women to reconnect with ourselves, um reconnect with that understanding that spirit and matter are not separate, but they are one. You know what I'm saying? It's that understanding of the blood mysteries and the womb, and the ancient wisdom that the womb has for us, that it's our ancient womb wisdom, you know what I'm saying? And how all of these, in doing these things, if we were to do these things, that again, that female collective consciousness rises, it continues to rise, and shit gets shut down. You know what I'm saying? It's 10:31. So I'm not going to hold you guys. I have so much to say. I wish, I just really wanted to get the book read. So that's what I'm doing. And you have your own thoughts, and you can think about it, and you can go back and study this, and maybe we'll maybe I'll have like a book club one of these days, and we can kind of chat it up together. But for now, I'm just going to sign off, and much love to you all. Much love to you all until next time.